Welcome back to Outlaw Operations. Tonight, we're unraveling a haunting tale woven with lies, greed, and betrayal, one that started with dreams of love and success but spiraled into darkness and tragedy. Before we begin, take a moment to share where you're listening from in the comments. And if true crime stories are your thing, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, find your comfort spot, relax, and let's dive into the story. 2 weeks had barely passed since the first tragedy in June 2015 when another heart-wrenching incident shook the hospital. This time, it wasn't a fragile preemie clinging to life in an incubator, it was a full-term baby boy, healthy in appearance, born after a long and painful labor. He had some difficulty breathing, nothing too alarming, just enough to warrant temporary observation. But somehow, through a twist of fate that would later haunt everyone involved, he ended up in the neonatal unit, the same unit that was slowly becoming a silent chamber of loss. The boy's mother still remembers that day in agonizing detail. She had just given birth. Exhausted, overwhelmed, but hopeful. Her baby was strong, not like the tiny fighters in the other cribs. He was going to be okay, or so she believed. She recalled seeing a nurse near her son's crib earlier that day. The woman wasn't doing anything overtly wrong, but there was something off. The way she hovered, seemingly idle, her eyes scanning the ward too calmly, her hands not quite busy. A feeling crept into the mother's chest then, unsettling, fleeting. She would later wish she'd trusted it. That night, the knock on the parents' hospital room door shattered the silence. A nurse stood there with urgent eyes, the baby had fallen critically ill. Panic. Sprinting through hospital corridors. When they arrived at the ward, the doctor was already trying to resuscitate their son. Over and over, he pushed, pleaded, fought. But there was no bringing him back. The baby died in front of their eyes. And no one could explain why. What came next was the beginning of a terrifying pattern. The baby's body bore a faint purple rash across his stomach. Small, blotchy, and unfamiliar. Medical staff were perplexed. It wasn't consistent with any known condition. Later, when more babies would perish under mysterious circumstances, those same purple spots would reappear, only to vanish shortly after death. The clues started coming together slowly, painfully. Then came the case of baby E, one of a pair of twins. Their mother, still recovering from a cesarean section, stayed in the hospital while her husband returned to work. On the evening of August 3rd, just like any other night, she followed her usual routine, cleaning, changing, comforting her children. The twins had a minor illness but nothing life-threatening. Things were supposed to be under control. But later that night, she heard a chilling cry. A sound no mother forgets. She rushed in to find blood around her son's mouth. The nurse on duty, again, was just steps away, too close, too calm. The mother screamed. Other nurses ran to help her, tried to calm her down, guide her out. Behind her, as she stumbled down the hallway, her baby began to bleed heavily. Doctors worked furiously, but again, it was too late. The same rash was there again. Purple. Brief. Unexplainable. One physician who witnessed this strange phenomenon began to investigate further. Books. Journals. Anything he could find. Eventually, he found something, a rare condition. A blockage of the pulmonary artery. Air embolism. It was almost unheard of in neonatal deaths. It marked a shift in the hospital's mindset. This wasn't natural. This was something, or someone, intervening. The deeper the doctors dug, the more the pieces came together. One name surfaced every time a child died. One face was always present. One pair of hands always nearby. Lucy Letby. She wasn't the type anyone would suspect. Born in 1990, raised in a quiet town. A girl with a soft voice, a gentle demeanor. Her friends described her as studious, focused, full of warmth. She'd wanted to be a nurse since childhood. She studied hard, graduated with pride, and started working in neonatal care. The staff liked her. She was active in charities, smiled often, sent kind messages to grieving parents. But behind that mask of compassion, investigators believed, hid something unimaginable. She was always there, always around, when death struck. Always smiling through the sorrow. At first, no one could fathom it. Not Lucy. Not the nurse who loved babies. But the evidence didn't lie. The injections weren't accidental. Air forced into tiny veins wasn't a mistake. One after another, healthy babies collapsed with no warning. And always, the same faint rash, the same quiet nurse, the same devastating outcome. Doctors, nurses, and parents began to whisper. Then speak. Then testify. Some broke down in court, unable to finish their sentences. One doctor confessed he hadn't understood the truth until months later. That he didn't want to believe what the evidence screamed. This wasn't an infection. This wasn't negligence. This was deliberate. The courtroom became a stage of grief. Mothers and fathers relived their worst nights under harsh fluorescent lights. Medical staff admitted they'd missed the signs. That they'd trusted too much. And all along, Lucy sat there, expressionless. No one could say why she did it. Was it for attention? Control? Some twisted sense of power? But the facts spoke louder than motive. Babies who should have gone home, who should have had first birthdays, who should have grown up, were buried instead. Their lives stolen in silence, with no struggle, no warning. By someone who was supposed to save them. They thought it was just another bad shift, just another tragic night in a place where life and death danced too closely. But that wasn't the case. Beneath the sterile walls of a neonatal unit, a quiet storm had been brewing, and by the time someone decided to really listen, the damage was already mounting. One of the head physicians had started to notice a disturbing pattern. Too many babies, born early but healthy, were suddenly dying without explanation. They brought it up to the hospital management, hoping their concerns would ring the alarm bells. Instead, the silence that followed was deafening. That evening, management had other things on their plate. Internal politics. Reputation control. Optics. The kind of things that don't bleed but still make institutions tremble. The word murder wasn't spoken out loud, at least not yet. But behind closed doors, some doctors were already whispering the unthinkable. They were convinced something was wrong, and all signs pointed toward one nurse. Lucy. A woman whose name now made stomachs churn and silenced rooms the moment it was spoken. Despite the growing unease, hospital leadership urged calm. They told the doctors to stand down, to keep things quiet. Don't cause a panic, they said. We can't afford the headlines. The doctors pushed back, they had to. This wasn't just about careers or scandal. Babies were dying. Yet management clung to denial, paralyzed by the fear of what the truth might cost. The nurses, too, were caught in a haze of disbelief. Was it possible that one of their own, someone who held the tiniest, most fragile lives in her hands, could be behind this horror? They hesitated, torn between loyalty and fear, unsure whether calling the police was a betrayal or a duty. Meanwhile, the pattern deepened. Babies who should have been stable suddenly crashed. Many developed strange rashes that faded the moment life slipped away. They didn't respond to resuscitation, and the more the doctors tried to save them, the more it seemed like someone, was working against them. They weren't just losing battles. They were being ambushed. Eventually, a group of doctors couldn't stomach the silence any longer. If the hospital wouldn't act, they would. They went straight to the police, bypassing the very system that was supposed to protect their patients. One of them later said he had no choice, he'd done everything to raise the alarm, but was met only with indifference. And waiting even a day longer, he feared, could cost another newborn their life. The investigation that followed peeled back layers no one wanted to see. At first, it was just whispers and data. Then came the pattern. The deaths only happened when Lucy was on shift. Every time tragedy struck, her name was on the duty roster. Every time a child's heart stopped, Lucy had been nearby. People tried to dismiss it as coincidence, bad luck, stress. But as the evidence piled up, the air in the hospital grew heavier. Lucy, under mounting pressure, insisted she was innocent. She said she was being made a scapegoat. That the real culprits were hiding behind polished shoes and titles. She even claimed that a group of doctors were conspiring against her to cover up hospital failures that might point fingers far beyond her. Still, investigators kept digging. And what they uncovered shifted everything. At first, it was just suspicion. But then came the test results, blood samples from 2 baby boys, each part of a twin pair. Both had been poisoned with insulin. The levels were shockingly high, impossible to be accidental. And in both cases, Lucy had been their nurse. The facility had strict safeguards. Accidental insulin overdoses were nearly impossible. But what they found in those blood tests couldn't be ignored. No other staff had handled those babies. No other explanation made sense. Those children had been deliberately poisoned. Then came the case that chilled even the most hardened detectives, a baby who had bled so severely during a code blue that the room looked like a war zone. The infant lost a quarter of his blood, pouring from his nose and mouth as doctors scrambled to save him. 5 doses of adrenaline. Nearly an hour of CPR. And Lucy, as always, was there. The baby's mother had seen her near the crib just moments before the bleeding began. When staff examined the child, they found injuries consistent with a metal instrument, shoved into the baby's mouth. Internal trauma. Massive bleeding. No chance of survival. At the time, the death was labeled natural. No autopsy. No investigation. Just another tragedy in a place used to grief. That decision would later be seen as a fatal mistake. The moment justice might have come sooner, but didn't. Lucy never confessed. She stood by her claims that she was being framed, that she was just doing her job. That others wanted to destroy her to save themselves. But the evidence kept rising like floodwater. And slowly, painfully, the story of what had happened in that neonatal ward began to unfold, not as a medical mystery, but as a horror story. One where the villain wore scrubs, smiled gently, and held life in her hands, only to let it slip away, again and again. The signs were there, long before anyone realized how deep the horror ran. If someone had just looked a little closer, if they'd questioned the strange pattern of bleeding, the foreign object involved, maybe things would have moved faster. Maybe Lucy would have been stopped earlier. But she wasn't. Instead, what followed was a chain of tragedy that no one could make sense of until it was too late. It wasn't the first time something had gone horribly wrong under her watch. There was a little girl, part of a set of triplets. After she died, the autopsy revealed something shocking, a devastating liver injury so severe that experienced forensic specialists compared it to what you might see in a high-speed car crash. And yet, no cause was ever found. Just silence and confusion. And Lucy? Lucy moved on, only to be connected to the death of the second triplet, named later in court documents, another innocent gone in a quiet hospital room. Then came the break, a long vacation in Ibiza. No deaths, no emergencies, no unexplained complications. Peace, for a while. But the calm was shattered the moment Lucy returned to work. Her very first shift back, 2 children gone within hours. Just like that. A third child was on the edge, barely hanging on. But this time, the parents intervened. Something about the way things felt, the energy in that ward, it didn't sit right. They took their baby and fled, insisting on transferring him to another hospital. That decision may have saved a life. June 23, 2016. Another set of triplets. Another nightmare. One of the babies, barely clinging to life, was bloated, gasping for air, his tiny stomach grotesquely swollen. The medical team fought like hell, pumping oxygen into his frail lungs, setting him up on a ventilator. Staff crowded around his crib. Among them, Lucy. Hours passed. 17 brutal hours. His brain, deprived of oxygen, was slipping away. They were waiting for the transfer team, clinging to hope. Then, in the middle of this desperate chaos, Lucy said something that chilled the room. "He's not going to make it anyway." Flat. Cold. No emotion. Everyone paused. The words were so casual, so detached, like she was describing a weather forecast. There was something about the way she looked at that baby, as if she was waiting for the final breath, as if she wanted to see it happen. That was the tipping point. The doctors, gripped by a mounting sense of dread, finally went to the police. Soon after, Lucy was quietly moved to another department, same staff, same protocols, same patients, but no more deaths. Not a single one. The silence was telling. Still, it wasn't enough to build a case. Not yet. The hospital, perhaps afraid of the implications, suspended her for a month. No concrete charges. No accusations. Just a quiet step back. Lucy didn't take it lightly. She filed a complaint. Claimed she was being treated unfairly. The management, trying to smooth things over, apologized. They even brought her back. But the doctors had one condition: surveillance cameras. Everywhere. Every room. Every shift. If Lucy was innocent, she had nothing to hide. She came back. But the eerie quiet continued. Not a single unexplained death followed. Behind the scenes, the police were digging deeper. And they found something unexpected. A connection that ran far beyond medicine. Lucy had been obsessed with a doctor from the resuscitation team. His name was kept private. Married. 17 years older. He worked closely with her, taught with her, had lunches, walks, and car rides together. But for him, it was friendship. For Lucy, it was something else. When police searched her home, they found love letters addressed to him. Hidden away were scribbled notes, chocolate wrappers he'd given her, screenshots of his wife's and children's social media accounts. It was all there, her quiet obsession laid bare. The most chilling part? In nearly every incident involving a critical resuscitation, he was there. Lucy had made sure of it. Experts would later suggest that she engineered these medical crises to bring him closer, to be the hero in front of him. The babies were her stage, the tragedies her twisted performance. When that doctor took the stand during the trial, Lucy unraveled. The cold, emotionless facade shattered. She cried. Tried to leave the courtroom. Her lawyer had to hold her back. Suddenly, the woman who showed no remorse as infants slipped away was visibly broken by the sight of one man. She claimed it was all platonic. He agreed. But her actions said otherwise. The final unraveling came in July 2018. The police made their move, raiding her parents' house and her own flat simultaneously. What they found was staggering: confidential medical files, hospital documents, photographs of baby cards, even condolence messages she had crafted for the parents of children she allegedly murdered. And on her phone, evidence tying her directly to the victims. They arrested her. Then released her on bail. A year later, she was arrested again. In June 2019, the charges came in full force: 7 counts of murder. 10 counts of attempted murder. The trial, scheduled for October 2022, was set to be a monster of a case: thousands of documents, hours of interrogation, and testimonies cloaked in secrecy to protect the identities of the tiny victims. But there was something else. Something personal. In Lucy's own handwriting, scrawled in notebooks and on sticky notes found at her home, confessions. Not direct admissions, but haunting reflections. One note described herself as evil, undeserving of life. Another admitted she had killed because she felt she wasn't good enough to care for them. I am bad. I am evil. I did this, it said. On the back of one note, a plea, I need help. I can't go on anymore. Lucy kept a diary, detailing the pain, the confusion, the things she said no one else could understand. But hidden between the lines was something much darker, a glimpse into the mind of someone capable of the unthinkable. The calm face of a nurse hiding a storm of chaos beneath her scrubs. The babies, the families, the grief, they weren't just victims of a medical mystery. They were part of a chilling story no one wanted to believe. But by then, it was too late. Life hadn't been kind to Lucy. She grew up quietly resigning herself to a reality where children, a loving husband, and the warmth of a family would always be things meant for other people. She carried that weight in silence, dragging it behind her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. To most, she was just another nurse doing her rounds, but behind closed doors, Lucy's pain was scribbled into short, anxious notes laced with despair. Every day, at the same time, she cried. Even when she told herself, and others, that nothing was wrong, the dread inside her said otherwise. It was the kind of ache that doesn't scream, just gnaws at you slowly, whispering that something is broken, even if you can't name it. When she met the resuscitation doctor, a man she eventually came to admire deeply, it felt like a spark of hope. He was kind, supportive, steady. In him, she saw someone who finally made her feel seen. But in early 2018, just before everything in her life began to unravel, he turned away. The timing couldn't have been crueler. Lucy had just been suspended from work, a blow that cut deeper than anyone could understand. Her job wasn't just employment. It was her identity, her anchor. Losing it left her adrift, spiraling into a depression that began to consume her from the inside out. When her personal writings surfaced, filled with apologies, self-blame, and desperate thoughts, the prosecution clung to them like damning confessions. One note, in particular, sent shockwaves through the courtroom, a piece of paper that bore the names and birth dates of triplets who had died under Lucy's care. Tucked beneath her bed, it was found alongside medical records, regretful phrases, and cryptic admissions that suggested a connection to the tragedy. She told the police those documents may have accidentally ended up in her apartment, left in her coat pockets and forgotten. But in a case like this, accidental explanations weren't enough. The deaths of children don't allow for careless errors without consequence. When Lucy appeared in court, she was a shadow of the nurse she once was. Her face told the story of sleepless nights and a spirit fractured by grief. She spoke about the crushing sorrow of being torn away from her life's purpose. That hospital wasn't just a workplace, it was where she felt needed, where her hands healed and her heart mattered. Prison changed everything. Depression took hold of her like a vice. Then came the second arrest in 2019, another knock on the door, another cold hand of accusation pressing on her chest. Police had raided her home at 6 a.m. while she was with her father. That morning, the world as she knew it collapsed again. Being labeled a child killer, a monster, was something no one could prepare for. And as she sat behind bars, days stretched into years. She became hypersensitive to sound, to light, to everything. The diagnosis came later, PTSD. But that label offered little comfort. Her days grew heavier during the trial. Traveling over an hour to the courtroom only to return late in the evening left her physically and emotionally drained. At times, she refused to show up, unwilling to face the grieving parents of the babies she once cared for. To them, her absence was seen as disrespect. But to Lucy, it was unbearable. Each accusation chipped away at her already fragile mind. She had lost her job, her reputation, and the hope of ever having a future that resembled anything close to normal. The past haunted her. She had started her nursing journey back in 2010. Back then, she had been eager, hopeful, a nurse who cared for 3 or 4 infants at a time, constantly taking extra training, striving for excellence. In 2015, she completed a special course in Liverpool that gave her new skills to care for babies straight out of intensive care. She was proud. She belonged. For a while, Lucy was the kind of nurse every parent hoped their baby would get. From June 2015 to June 2016, she worked tirelessly as waves of critically ill infants came through the ward. Some had rare clotting disorders, others were born barely clinging to life. She stayed late, skipped breaks, put everything into her job. But that kind of dedication, when paired with darkness, becomes a dangerous mix. The deaths began to add up. The prosecution opened a 6-year-long window, reviewing case after case. One by one, they began to see patterns. Medical records were scrutinized. Incidents re-evaluated. Witnesses were questioned. And slowly, the picture began to change. Lucy had once been the most reliable nurse in the unit, someone seen as calm, competent, even exceptional. But now she was the prime suspect in a chilling series of deaths. What made it worse? She hadn't hidden anything. Her actions, the prosecution said, were right in plain sight. Her colleagues had suspicions, but no one wanted to believe the worst. Yet, the evidence was there. One baby, then another, then more. 7 children were dead. 10 more had nearly died. The stories were brutal, unexplained collapses, sudden oxygen drops, mysterious injections. As the jury deliberated, the weight of their decision hung over the entire nation. After 22 days of deliberation, they delivered their verdict. Guilty. 7 counts of murder. 10 counts of attempted murder. The courtroom was silent as Lucy Letby's fate was sealed. On August 21, 2023, she was sentenced to life in prison, with no chance of parole. Only 3 other women in British history had ever received such a sentence. But Lucy's name was now carved into the darkest corners of crime history. In the aftermath, the headlines screamed, "Britain's most prolific child killer." A nurse turned executioner. A caregiver transformed into a symbol of betrayal. For those who followed the case, the horror wasn't just in the deaths, it was in the quiet, hidden unraveling of a woman who had once devoted her life to saving others. And in the end, the question that lingered wasn't just what she did, but why. Life hadn't been kind to Lucy. She grew up quietly resigning herself to a reality where children, a loving husband, and the warmth of a family would always be things meant for other people. She carried that weight in silence, dragging it behind her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. To most, she was just another nurse doing her rounds, but behind closed doors, Lucy's pain was scribbled into short, anxious notes laced with despair. Every day, at the same time, she cried. Even when she told herself, and others, that nothing was wrong, the dread inside her said otherwise. It was the kind of ache that doesn't scream, just gnaws at you slowly, whispering that something is broken, even if you can't name it. When she met the resuscitation doctor, a man she eventually came to admire deeply, it felt like a spark of hope. He was kind, supportive, steady. In him, she saw someone who finally made her feel seen. But in early 2018, just before everything in her life began to unravel, he turned away. The timing couldn't have been crueler. Lucy had just been suspended from work, a blow that cut deeper than anyone could understand. Her job wasn't just employment. It was her identity, her anchor. Losing it left her adrift, spiraling into a depression that began to consume her from the inside out. When her personal writings surfaced, filled with apologies, self-blame, and desperate thoughts, the prosecution clung to them like damning confessions. One note, in particular, sent shockwaves through the courtroom, a piece of paper that bore the names and birth dates of triplets who had died under Lucy's care. Tucked beneath her bed, it was found alongside medical records, regretful phrases, and cryptic admissions that suggested a connection to the tragedy. She told the police those documents may have accidentally ended up in her apartment, left in her coat pockets and forgotten. But in a case like this, accidental explanations weren't enough. The deaths of children don't allow for careless errors without consequence. When Lucy appeared in court, she was a shadow of the nurse she once was. Her face told the story of sleepless nights and a spirit fractured by grief. She spoke about the crushing sorrow of being torn away from her life's purpose. That hospital wasn't just a workplace, it was where she felt needed, where her hands healed and her heart mattered. Prison changed everything. Depression took hold of her like a vice. Then came the second arrest in 2019, another knock on the door, another cold hand of accusation pressing on her chest. Police had raided her home at 6 a.m. while she was with her father. That morning, the world as she knew it collapsed again. Being labeled a child killer, a monster, was something no one could prepare for. And as she sat behind bars, days stretched into years. She became hypersensitive to sound, to light, to everything. The diagnosis came later, PTSD. But that label offered little comfort. Her days grew heavier during the trial. Traveling over an hour to the courtroom only to return late in the evening left her physically and emotionally drained. At times, she refused to show up, unwilling to face the grieving parents of the babies she once cared for. To them, her absence was seen as disrespect. But to Lucy, it was unbearable. Each accusation chipped away at her already fragile mind. She had lost her job, her reputation, and the hope of ever having a future that resembled anything close to normal. The past haunted her. She had started her nursing journey back in 2010. Back then, she had been eager, hopeful, a nurse who cared for 3 or 4 infants at a time, constantly taking extra training, striving for excellence. In 2015, she completed a special course in Liverpool that gave her new skills to care for babies straight out of intensive care. She was proud. She belonged. For a while, Lucy was the kind of nurse every parent hoped their baby would get. From June 2015 to June 2016, she worked tirelessly as waves of critically ill infants came through the ward. Some had rare clotting disorders, others were born barely clinging to life. She stayed late. Skipped breaks. Put everything into her job. But that kind of dedication, when paired with darkness, becomes a dangerous mix. The deaths began to add up. The prosecution opened a 6-year-long window, reviewing case after case. One by one, they began to see patterns. Medical records were scrutinized. Incidents re-evaluated. Witnesses were questioned. And slowly, the picture began to change. Lucy had once been the most reliable nurse in the unit, someone seen as calm, competent, even exceptional. But now she was the prime suspect in a chilling series of deaths. What made it worse? She hadn't hidden anything. Her actions, the prosecution said, were right in plain sight. Her colleagues had suspicions, but no one wanted to believe the worst. Yet, the evidence was there. One baby, then another, then more. 7 children were dead. 10 more had nearly died. The stories were brutal, unexplained collapses, sudden oxygen drops, mysterious injections. As the jury deliberated, the weight of their decision hung over the entire nation. After 22 days of deliberation, they delivered their verdict. Guilty. 7 counts of murder. 10 counts of attempted murder. The courtroom was silent as Lucy Letby's fate was sealed. On August 21, 2023, she was sentenced to life in prison, with no chance of parole. Only 3 other women in British history had ever received such a sentence. But Lucy's name was now carved into the darkest corners of crime history. In the aftermath, the headlines screamed, "Britain's most prolific child killer." A nurse turned executioner. A caregiver transformed into a symbol of betrayal. For those who followed the case, the horror wasn't just in the deaths, it was in the quiet, hidden unraveling of a woman who had once devoted her life to saving others. And in the end, the question that lingered wasn't just what she did, but why. She had been trying to hold herself together, taking the medication her doctor prescribed, talking to friends about the struggles she faced. Lately, there was a shift. Asanta began sounding hopeful again. She was talking more openly, more brightly, saying she felt like things were finally getting better. People close to her noticed it. There was life coming back into her words. But beneath the surface, something darker was brewing. When the first attack happened, Rosario, her adoptive mother, didn't act. No call to the police. No digging for answers. She said it was because she didn't want to upset Asanta. Her mind was fragile, after all. But that excuse rang hollow. Asanta had been in and out of psychiatric hospitals for years. She'd voiced thoughts no one ever wants to hear from a child. She was exhausted, overwhelmed by school, buried in books and expectations she couldn't carry anymore. The housekeeper, who had been with the family long enough to notice things most people missed, said Rosario had been growing impatient. Asanta was no longer the high-achieving little girl she once bragged about. Her grades were slipping. She wasn't meeting the standards Rosario had set so high. And just like that, the affection began to wear thin. Rosario even floated the idea of sending her away to Poland for school, far away, out of sight. But she never told that to the detectives. That omission triggered something. Investigators turned their eyes on Rosario. They traced her steps, especially focusing on a visit she made to a remote country house on the very day Asanta vanished. What they found was chilling. About 4 kilometers from the house, Asanta's body was discovered. When police arrived at the scene, Rosario's reaction wasn't that of a grieving mother, it was something else. Anger. Panic. She rushed upstairs, seemingly trying to hide something. A search revealed a piece of orange rope in a nearby trash bin. It matched the one used to bind Asanta's wrists and ankles. Alongside it, a black mask. A pair of gloves. All carefully stashed but not carefully enough. No fingerprints. No DNA. Nothing the forensic team could hold on to definitively. Still, the picture was becoming clearer. Asanta had died of suffocation. Soft pressure had been applied over her mouth and nose, maybe a pillow. She likely passed out before dying. The autopsy also uncovered something else, a staggering amount of lorazepam in her system, 27 pills. That's 9 times the standard adult dose. She had taken it before, too. Hair samples told the story of repeated overdoses over the last 3 months. The drug isn't just dangerous in large amounts. It erases memory. Weakens the body. Makes escape impossible. Asanta didn't have a prescription. Rosario did. She told the police someone else must have given the pills to the girl so she wouldn't remember anything. But that didn't explain the pattern. It didn't explain why this drug kept showing up in her system, only that someone had been trying to erase the child's pain, or her memory, or both. Surveillance footage filled in more of the blanks. At 2 p.m. on the day she died, Asanta visited her father, Alfonso. By 5:21 p.m., she was home. 7 minutes later, Rosario arrived. Then, at 6:20 p.m., a green Mercedes, registered to Rosario, was seen heading toward the country house. A girl was in the passenger seat. It was Asanta. They were driving toward the place where her body would later be found. When confronted with this evidence, Rosario began to unravel. Gone was the cold composure. Her face trembled, guilt or fear, it was hard to say. She claimed they were just out shopping for swimsuits. Said they went to the country house together, but Asanta didn't want to go inside. Rosario said the girl stayed in the car while she ran errands and did some chores. Hours passed, according to her story. When she returned, Asanta wanted to go home. Rosario claimed she drove her back, but dropped her off 20 minutes from their apartment to avoid traffic. No one bought it. Police scoured every camera on the outskirts of Santiago. Not a single one showed Rosario returning with her daughter. The only footage they found was of her leaving the house alone. At 9 p.m. That same house, where Asanta would be found dead not long after. Everything Rosario said fell apart under scrutiny. The detectives saw it in her eyes: arrogance, detachment, a disturbing lack of grief. She insisted a mysterious man dressed in black had something to do with the crime. That this phantom figure entered their home, drugged her daughter, and vanished. But neighbors told a different story. One remembered the night vividly. It was back in July, the night of the first attack. He heard screams, and something even more unsettling. Silence. Not from people, from the dogs. They didn't bark. Not once. As if the person who entered that home wasn't a stranger at all. The dogs knew him, or her. Suspicions intensified. Was the first home invasion even real? Or was it staged to lay the groundwork for something far more sinister? Some investigators theorized it was a dry run, a first failed attempt. Others believed the whole story was fabricated by Rosario to cover her tracks. And then there was the funeral. September 24th. A moment that should have been filled with tears and mourning turned into something grotesque. Rosario and Alfonso posed for a selfie in front of the casket. A child's casket. Nothing about it felt right. Not the inconsistencies. Not the detachment. Not the lies. Piece by piece, the facade fell away. What began as a case of a missing girl spiraled into a grim story of betrayal, control, and quiet cruelty. Asanta had once believed things were getting better. But behind her hopeful words and medication, there was a storm she couldn't name, one that, in the end, would take everything from her. The funeral had barely ended when the handcuffs clicked around Rosario's wrists. Grief had barely settled in the air before suspicion began swirling around her like smoke. By then, detectives had pieced together what might have sparked the quiet horror that unfolded 9 months earlier. A handful of witnesses finally spoke up, details they'd held close now spilled out, and they pointed to the beginning of something tragic, bloody, and inevitable. It all started back in January 2013. Rosario had met Manuel Garcia, a charming real estate agent she hired to sell a few properties. Manuel wasn't just any man, he was married and made it clear he had no plans of leaving his family. To him, their connection was simply an affair, a fleeting escape. But Rosario accepted the terms. She didn't seem to mind being second in line as long as she had him in secret. Meanwhile, her marriage to Alfonso was rotting from the inside. She described him as dull, uninspiring, a man with delusions of grandeur, and no substance to back them up. Insensitive, uninteresting, a failure. The contrast between him and Manuel made it even harder for her to tolerate her husband. Eventually, Alfonso found messages on her phone, evidence of betrayal, and in February 2013, their marriage officially ended. Rosario and her daughter, Asanta, stayed in the apartment. Her business continued, and so did her weekend visits to a country house. Custody of Asanta was split, each parent could see her, and for a while, they managed this delicate balance. Asanta drifted between two homes, but her bond with her mother always seemed stronger. Alfonso tried, really tried, to connect with his daughter, even telling Rosario that no matter what, they'd always be tied through the little girl they had adopted together. But maybe Rosario didn't want that tie. Maybe she wanted to sever it for good. And maybe, in her mind, the only way to do that was to erase the one thing keeping them connected. Summer came, and Rosario's relationship with Manuel came crashing down. But not for long. It was Alfonso who had pushed her to end things. He had offered help with Asanta during a hospital stay, and in return, she agreed to stay away from Manuel. It looked like a ceasefire. A compromise for the sake of their daughter. But then came September 21st, Rosario broke her word. She spent most of the day with Manuel, only returning home in the evening. Hours later, Asanta was dead. The investigation unfolded like a grim jigsaw puzzle. There were whispers and guesses, but one detail echoed through every conversation: male DNA had been found on the child's clothing. The defense pounced on this. They painted a picture of an unknown male attacker. Could Rosario have been uninvolved? The police were skeptical. Rosario was the last person to see the child alive, and her story was full of cracks. Still, they had to follow the evidence. Alfonso came under suspicion first. Then the focus shifted, Manuel, perhaps. But Manuel had an alibi. CCTV footage showed him at a restaurant in Madrid that evening, dining with his girlfriend. No motive. No opportunity. And then, like a shadow falling across the scene, came the name Rama. A Colombian national, living in Madrid, 6 hours away from the crime scene. His DNA matched partially. But Rama denied everything. Claimed he had never been to Santiago. His alibi was airtight, backed up by footage and witnesses. Even stranger, the forensic lab suggested that some of the DNA traces could be the result of contamination. A mistake, or worse, tampering. Had someone deliberately manipulated the evidence to throw investigators off the trail? At this point, nothing made sense. So many loose ends. And neither Rosario nor Alfonso seemed particularly broken by the death of their daughter. Rosario, so delicate in appearance, hardly seemed capable of violence, but the police weren't buying it. Phone records were no help. Both Rosario and Alfonso had their phones off during the crucial window. They claimed it was coincidence. Dead batteries, nothing more. But detectives knew better than to believe in coincidences when a child ends up dead. Then came a breakthrough, subtle but damning. A local pharmacist, a friend of Rosario's, revealed a conversation from July 5th. The day after an alleged break-in at Rosario's home, one where an intruder had supposedly attacked a Santa. That was the first time Rosario had asked for lorazepam, a strong sedative. And after that, she kept buying more. Too much for it to be casual. Too much for it to be innocent. The teachers had noticed things too. One violin lesson stood out. A Santa had arrived with her father. But something was wrong, she could barely keep her eyes open, her body sluggish, her focus scattered. Alfonso dismissed it as allergy medication. But it kept happening. The girl was sleepy, withdrawn, not herself. Her teachers worried, but the parents always had excuses. Health issues, they claimed. Nothing serious. 2 days before her death, Rosario informed the school that a Santa wouldn't attend class due to a severe reaction to prescription meds. That was the final red flag for detectives. They had seen enough. And so, Alfonso was arrested too. A quiet girl with a love for music had been drugged, silenced, and ultimately stolen from the world by the very people meant to protect her. Whether it was an act of desperation, control, or a twisted attempt to erase the past, one thing was certain, the Santa never stood a chance. Now, behind cold walls and under harsh fluorescent lights, Rosario and Alfonso sit apart, no longer bound by marriage, but forever connected by the shadow of their crime. The silence that follows them isn't peace, it's guilt. And no matter how long they deny, or how deep they bury the truth, the story of what happened to that little girl will haunt them forever. It started as a fractured family trying to mend what was already broken. Rosario and Alfonso had long been divorced, but Alfonso never really let go. In June 2013, Rosario suffered a nervous breakdown and was hospitalized. That's when Alfonso moved back in, clinging to hope. He believed this could be the turning point, a chance to reunite with Rosario, to rebuild the family they once were. Rosario had just broken things off with her lover, and Alfonso saw that as a sign. He visited her in the hospital, took care of her after her discharge, and tried to piece things back together. But there was something off. Something unspoken. Despite appearances, Rosario hadn't actually ended the affair. She was still meeting her lover, and she met him the very day her adopted daughter, a Santa, was murdered. When this came to light, everything began to unravel. Investigators started to believe that Alfonso wasn't acting out of love anymore. He wanted revenge. Revenge for the lies. Revenge for the betrayal. Maybe that's why he brought the orange rope to the country house. Maybe that's why it ended up in the trash. Carelessly tossed away, like it had served its purpose. But what disturbed detectives even more was Rosario's reaction when the police arrived. She didn't ask questions. She didn't scream or demand answers. No, she went straight to the trash. Like she already knew what was in there. Like she was trying to make sure something was still hidden. Her behavior painted a different picture, one where she wasn't just a grieving mother, but someone deeply entangled in a horrifying scheme. The new evidence made the story darker still. Whenever Alfonso stayed home with Rosario and Asanta, the little girl would often become groggy, dazed. Toxicology reports later confirmed traces of lorazepam in her system, a drug never prescribed to her. It raised horrifying questions. Who was drugging Asanta? And why? When confronted, Alfonso denied everything. Calm. Unshaken. He said he wasn't guilty. Rosario, on the other hand, unraveled. She swung between hysteria and depression, like she was fighting with something inside herself. Alfonso, in contrast, remained eerily composed. He kept whispering to Rosario that all they needed was love. That it would all be over soon. Behind his cool facade, though, was a disturbing truth. The police discovered that the hard drive from Alfonso's laptop had been completely replaced. Experts recovered what they could, and what they found was devastating, over 500,000 images and videos. Many of them featured young girls, most appearing to be of Asian descent. Many of them minors. Alfonso's social media history mirrored these findings. Dozens of conversations, interactions, images, all pointing to a sickening obsession. Then came the testimony that changed everything. A woman who ran an escort agency came forward. She claimed Alfonso had been a frequent client. But it wasn't just the frequency, it was the specificity of his requests. He wanted Asian women, always. And he wanted them dressed like schoolgirls. Rosario knew. Everyone close to them knew. It was a secret hidden in plain sight. When photos surfaced of Asanta dressed in revealing clothes, it stopped being speculation. Prosecutors painted a chilling image, a calm, well-composed man who had not only exploited his adopted daughter but silenced her permanently when she became a threat. Rosario wasn't just complicit. She was part of it. The trial accused them both, not just of negligence or abuse, but of murder. Yet, both stayed silent. They spoke only through their lawyers. No confessions. No apologies. Just blank stares and rehearsed statements. Their defense team tried to paint them as victims of a media circus. But the psychologists who examined them saw something else. Narcissistic traits. Personality disorders. A need to project the image of a perfect family. Rosario and Alfonso hadn't adopted Asanta out of love. They did it to impress Rosario's parents. To show the world a happy family image. But Asanta was never truly theirs. She was a prop. A symbol. And when that illusion began to crack, they didn't protect her. They discarded her. A 15-year-old friend of Asanta's gave a heartbreaking testimony. She had seen Alfonso near Rosario's house around 6 p.m. on the day of the murder. Alfonso swore he was home all day. But footage from a nearby camera placed him outside at 9 p.m., after Asanta had already vanished. The lies piled up. So did the evidence. Even the trial itself turned into a spectacle. The judge's behavior raised eyebrows. Some believed he was more interested in fame than justice. That suspicion gained traction when he published a book about the case after the trial concluded. Yet despite all this, many neighbors and relatives still believed Rosario and Alfonso had been good foster parents. On the surface, they seemed loving, structured, devoted. But behind closed doors, their daughter was slowly unraveling. And no one saw it. In court, Alfonso maintained his quiet demeanor. Rosario cried often, breaking down mid-testimony, her emotions spinning wildly. Her cousin testified too, bringing up old ghosts. In 2011 and 2012, Rosario's parents died at home, both deaths sudden, both ruled natural. But her cousin had always been suspicious. He believed Rosario had a hand in their deaths, just like he believed she helped cover up what happened to a Santa. He claimed it was all about money, property, control. The defense dismissed these claims, calling them baseless. The parents were elderly, 77 and 88, and had died in their sleep. There were no autopsies. No suspicious findings. Their bodies, like a Santa's, had been cremated. The prosecution didn't back down. To them, Rosario and Alfonso were predators. Cold. Calculating. Sociopaths driven by twisted desires and the need to control everything around them. Alfonso's obsession with underage girls, the drugging, the deception, it all pointed to one conclusion. A Santa had become a threat. And threats had to be silenced. Her death wasn't an accident. It was a decision. One made long before the rope was found in the trash, before the lies started crumbling, before the judge penned his book. It was a crime hidden beneath a mask of normalcy. And no matter how quiet Alfonso stayed, no matter how many tears Rosario cried, the truth had already clawed its way to the surface. There was something off about the silence that followed Rosario's sentencing. Even in the cold echo of the courtroom, it was clear, this wasn't just justice being served. It felt more like a curtain being drawn over a grim, twisted performance that had been years in the making. Some believed Rosario had always known. That behind closed doors, she wasn't just turning a blind eye to Alfonso's darkness, she was shielding it. Others whispered a crueler theory, that perhaps she didn't see the little girl as a daughter, but as a weight. A problem to be erased. Whatever the truth was, the verdict landed heavy, 18 years in prison for both Rosario and Alfonso. That was October 30th, 2015. The courtroom, packed with silent watchers, let out a breath it had been holding far too long. But the story didn't end with the judge's gavel. After their sentencing, both tried to claw their way out, filing appeals, hoping for a second chance. But the justice system stood firm. The doors stayed locked. Time dragged on behind bars. And then, November 18, 2020. Rosario was found in her prison cell, lifeless. A belt tightened around her neck. It wasn't the first time she tried to escape that way. It was her third. This time, she succeeded. Alfonso remains behind bars. Still claiming innocence. Still breathing. Still waiting for someone to believe his version of the truth. But if you thought that was unsettling, the story of Ramsey Scrivo might just make your blood run cold. It began in January 2014, in the small Michigan town of St. Clair Shores. Donna Scrivo and her eldest son Ramsey shared a quiet life in a modest home. From the outside, they looked like any other family trying to make ends meet. But peel back a few layers, and something far darker lived beneath the surface. Ramsey, born in 1981, was the kind of child who always seemed to be trying to please. He had a younger brother, and together they grew up under the strict gaze of their parents. Catholic school, family expectations, discipline, it was all there. He graduated college in '99 and got a job at an accounting firm. It didn't last. He was fired a year later. And from there, it was a slow slide. Job after job slipped through his fingers. Eventually, he joined the family business, trying to rebuild. But then tragedy struck, their father fell ill and passed away. Ramsey never seemed to recover. On January 25, 2014, just after 6:30 p.m., Ramsey told his mother he was stepping out to buy cigarettes. Donna nodded, maybe even gave him a soft reminder to dress warm, it was freezing outside. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. At first, no one panicked. He was a grown man, after all. Maybe he stopped by a friend's house, went for a drive, needed some space. But by the next morning, Donna was pacing. No call. No message. No Ramsey. By January 27, she went to the police. She explained everything, his struggles with substance abuse, mental illness, the bar fight he'd recently been involved in. She told them Ramsey was required to undergo regular drug and alcohol tests. He had problems, yes, but he was still her son. The officers began their work. They checked credit card activity, but nothing had been used since he left. No sign of any purchase. No trip to the store. That raised eyebrows. Then they tracked his phone. It was found tossed into a neighbor's yard like garbage. The neighbor had no idea it was even there. Stranger still, the phone's call records didn't match Donna's story. The calls she swore she made that night, they weren't there. The timeline cracked. Police dug deeper. Neighbors admitted they hadn't seen Ramsey for several days, even before Donna reported him missing. One woman mentioned something else, a strong, unmistakable smell of bleach and cleaning agents pouring from the Scrivo home the day before Ramsey disappeared. It wasn't normal. It wasn't right. The past began to unravel. Donna Scrivo, born in 1954 in Dallas, had always dreamed of becoming a nurse. She made that dream real, worked hard, built a family. She married Dan in 1971, and soon after Ramsey came along. They relocated to Michigan and added another son to the family. Life was humble but stable. Until it wasn't. In 2003, Donna had a heart attack. She survived, but something in her changed. Her memory faded. Her anxiety grew. She left nursing behind, the one thing that had grounded her for 12 years. Then came Ramsey's diagnosis, paranoid schizophrenia. He was angry, unstable, convinced the world was out to get him. He refused medication. Said it made him feel like a zombie. He didn't want the side effects. He didn't want to feel weak. But the voices didn't stop. The paranoia grew. He believed someone was poisoning his food. That a nanochip was hidden in his tooth. He told people he was being tracked. Watched. Controlled. After a violent altercation left him with a serious head injury, his mother took even tighter control. She didn't trust anyone else to care for him. Not even professionals. She kept him close. Too close. Then came the day the lies caught up. The phone records. The neighbors' stories. The bleach. Eventually, authorities followed a trail that led them to something unthinkable. Ramsey's dismembered remains were discovered in trash bags, scattered across different locations. The truth became undeniable. Donna Scrivo, his own mother, had killed him. Her motive? Some say she snapped. Others believe she convinced herself she was saving him, from himself, from the world, from a life she thought he could never survive. She was arrested, charged, and convicted. But long before that gavel fell, the horror had already unfolded. A mother driven by desperation or madness, or maybe both, had done the unthinkable. And Ramsey's voice, forever silenced, was left to echo through court documents, forensic reports, and a mother's unraveling story. Because in the end, every crime leaves behind two stories, the one that's told in court, and the one that lingers in the shadows. Ramsey's decline didn't happen overnight, it crept in slowly, like a shadow inching across the floor, silent but certain. It started with a fall. He hit the concrete hard, and though he got back up, something in him didn't. After that, he just wasn't the same. His moods grew darker. His drinking escalated. Nights at the bar ended in fights instead of laughter. He became a danger to others, and to himself. One of those fights, a brutal altercation with a friend, landed him on probation. But that was only the beginning. Things really started to spiral when Ramsey lost the one person who had always managed to keep him grounded, his father, Neil. To Ramsey, Neil wasn't just a parent, he was a best friend, a calming presence who could talk him down when the world got too loud. Neil understood Ramsey in a way no one else could, and his steady hand kept the storms at bay. While Neil was alive, Ramsey had stuck to his medication. He was still struggling, sure, but he was manageable. Stable, even. Neil's death tore a hole in Ramsey's world. With him gone, the last thread of balance snapped. Left behind was Donna, Ramsey's mother, who had always tried to maintain control over their lives. But control wasn't what Ramsey needed. And Donna, already at her wit's end, watched helplessly as her son unraveled. In desperation, Ramsey began using Marin, a leftover prescription that had once belonged to his father. But it only made things worse. His mental health disintegrated rapidly, and it soon became clear that Ramsey was slipping beyond reach. Fearing for both her safety and his, Donna had him admitted to a psychiatric facility. Doctors diagnosed him with psychosis. Legal guardianship was granted to Donna, which gave the hospital authority to regulate his medication. For a time, it worked. Ramsey improved enough to be discharged. He came back home. But home wasn't the safe haven it once was. The tension between mother and son simmered, always just beneath the surface. Then, one night, a fire broke out in their house. It started in the basement, right where Ramsey had been sleeping. Donna escaped and called for help. Ramsey was pulled from the smoke and flames just in time. But even as the fire was extinguished, new suspicions ignited. The cause? Faulty wiring, officially. Still, the circumstances were strange enough to raise eyebrows. Nothing was proven, but the damage was done, the house was uninhabitable. They moved to a rental, hoping to start fresh. But the move only seemed to deepen the cracks in their already fractured relationship. Ramsey, now 32, was still living under the weight of court-appointed guardianship. He chafed under Donna's watchful eye. Eventually, he petitioned the court to end the guardianship. After 6 months of his mother's firm control, he was ready to take back his life. And for a brief moment, it seemed like he might. He moved out. Tried to live on his own terms. Donna, meanwhile, went to Texas to visit family. She talked about moving back home, maybe even bringing Ramsey with her. But that never happened. Because on January 27, 2014, Ramsey disappeared. Donna reported him missing. Days passed with no sign of him. Then, on January 30th, something horrifying surfaced in China Township. A woman driving down a snowy road noticed something odd in a field, something dark, out of place. She got out to investigate. What she found would haunt her for the rest of her life. Scattered across the field were human intestines, red against the white snow. Nearby, a bag. Inside it, a severed head. A human head. More grisly items surrounded the scene, turning the quiet field into a nightmarish crime scene. The police descended on the area, horrified. They began a frantic search and recovered more remains, a mutilated torso. The rest of the body was missing. The head and torso were so badly disfigured that immediate identification was impossible. Then came another tip. A city resident reported strange items dumped in a public trash can. Investigators combed through the garbage and found more evidence: burned clothes, a partially melted ID card, and scattered debris stained with blood. Fire damage had obscured the documents, but it was enough to tell them this victim was male. And more was yet to be uncovered. Elsewhere in the city, a bloody electric saw was discovered, along with 4 used blades. Whoever had done this had taken their time, had come prepared. Also found were personal effects, clothing, a soda bottle, bits and pieces of someone's life, now reduced to evidence. The forensic team moved quickly. Fingerprints were lifted. Tests were run. And then came confirmation: the body belonged to none other than Ramsey Scribbo, the missing man reported just days earlier. He hadn't just died. He had been murdered. strangled, dismembered. Drug tests revealed something even more chilling. Ramsey had dangerously high levels of antidepressants and Xanax in his system, 4 times the normal dose. Enough to sedate, possibly even to kill. And Donna, his own mother, had been in charge of managing his medication. The police shifted from search to investigation. Ramsey hadn't simply wandered off. Someone had done this to him. They began questioning everyone, friends, neighbors, anyone who knew him. One witness recalled seeing a woman in an SUV dumping something suspicious near a trash site. He couldn't recall the license plate. He couldn't even say what make or model the vehicle was. But he remembered the driver. It was a woman. That was enough for police to scour nearby surveillance footage. They combed through hours of recordings. And eventually, they found her, the same SUV, the same location. The driver was clear as day. It was Donna Scrivo. The footage showed her transporting bags in her old 1990 Chevrolet Bezier, bags that, investigators now knew, contained her son's remains. The detectives were stunned. Donna, the mother who had raised the missing report, the one who claimed to have no idea where Ramsey had gone. They brought her in for questioning. Donna kept her answers vague, claiming mental health issues, spinning a fog of confusion around her every word. She hinted that Ramsey had ended his own life. But the evidence told a different story, a darker one. And though the motive remained murky, one thing was horrifyingly clear: Ramsey Scrivo hadn't just lost control of his life. He had lost it at the hands of the one person left who was supposed to protect him. His mother. The truth was far darker than anyone could have imagined. Donna's story, that her son had simply vanished, was a lie crafted to cover a gruesome reality. Ramsey's body had been dismembered, scattered, and hidden, a horror no mother should ever have to commit or conceal. The police, seeing through her facade, knew something far more sinister had unfolded behind closed doors. The tension between Donna and Ramsey had boiled over into something deadly, a violent clash that left one of them broken beyond repair. The authorities quickly zeroed in on Donna as the prime suspect. She wasn't just accused of murder, she faced first-degree charges with aggravating circumstances. The weight of the evidence against her was mounting, but Donna kept weaving her story, trying desperately to mislead the investigation. When police executed search warrants on the Ramsey family apartment and Donna's car, what they found was damning. The air inside the apartment burned their nostrils, a harsh chemical smell revealed her attempt to scrub away the truth. Cleaning products filled every corner, a desperate effort to erase what had happened. But even the strongest cleaners couldn't wash away the drops of blood splattered across the bathroom floor, smeared on the hallway walls, the porch, and the front railings. The scene told a silent, chilling tale that no amount of soap could erase. In a strange twist, the parking lot was empty. No cars. Yet Donna was trying to donate her car to a Detroit charity, and Ramsey's vehicle had already been handed off. The police traced both cars and found blood stains inside Donna's vehicle, blood that forensic tests confirmed belonged to Ramsey. The community, once peaceful, was shaken to its core as news of the crime spread through local media and social platforms. Witnesses started to come forward, piecing together a timeline that was dark and twisted. The investigation uncovered a chilling detail. On January 26, Donna had purchased an electric saw and a blade from a nearby hardware store. That very saw was later found, hidden in a trash bag alongside the fragments of Ramsey's remains. A neighbor, Patricia, recalled seeing Donna hauling 3 black garbage bags to her silver car, a detail the prosecution would use heavily. Neighbors, horrified, would later testify in court about what they saw and suspected. Donna's defense lawyer tried to paint her as mentally unwell, pushing for a psychiatric evaluation. But doctors who examined her found her fully sane, capable of standing trial and understanding the gravity of the charges. When the trial began in May 2015, Donna sat before the jury, proclaiming her innocence, pleading for freedom. The prosecution laid bare a chilling accusation: Donna had given Ramsey an overdose of Xanax, times the recommended amount. Records showed she'd been prescribed a 90-day supply of the drug in early January, and less than a month later, during a police raid, only one pill remained. The rest were taken by Ramsey, suggesting she had administered the medication intentionally and dangerously. The prosecution argued this was a deliberate act, part of a calculated plan that ended in murder. In the days following Ramsey's death, Donna had dismembered his body in the bathroom. She wrapped the pieces in trash bags and, to avoid detection, took them out slowly, disposing of them in different bins across town. It was a horrific act of cold calculation, a mother's final betrayal, or so the prosecution claimed. But Donna's version of the story was wildly different. She told the court that on January 25, a masked intruder had broken into the apartment. According to her, this stranger's intent was to kill Ramsey. She claimed to have been in the basement doing laundry, unaware of the break-in until she came upstairs and found her son dead, bound next to his bed, and the intruder standing over him. The man didn't harm her but forced her to dispose of the body, keeping watch over her for 5 days. She said she was handcuffed to a bed, unable to leave, terrified and controlled. Many found this story hard to believe. Why would a violent intruder linger in a home for days, watching his captive so closely? Why hadn't Donna tried to escape during moments of distraction? Police found no evidence of this mysterious man, no DNA, no fingerprints, no trace at the crime scene. The jury was left to question whether Donna's tale was a desperate fabrication to cover her guilt. Throughout the trial, Donna clung to her story of captivity and fear, even as the evidence painted a grim picture of her involvement. The prosecution's case was built on hard facts: the saw purchase, the blood in the car, the drug overdose, the bloodstains in the apartment, and the fragments of Ramsey's remains. The defense argued there was no direct proof tying her to the body, but the shadow of doubt was thin. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated. On June 23, 2015, their verdict was clear. Donna Scrivo, 61 years old, was found guilty of first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Donna has maintained her innocence, appealing her conviction, but all attempts have been denied. Today, she remains locked away in a Michigan state prison, a mother condemned by her own actions or perhaps by a story never fully told. Are you ready for another chilling tale? The story of Rachel Winkler begins far away in California, where she was born in 1975. The second of 4 children, Rachel's early life seemed ordinary, until the cracks began to show. When she was just 10 years old, her family was torn apart by secrets and betrayal. Her father left after a brief affair shattered her parents' marriage, sending Rachel, her siblings, and their mother to Georgia.